Hello there, Ray here, and today I will be showing 4 ways that you can steal the dragon's ender crystals. What makes the ender crystals that come from the dragon fight different from the ender crystals that you place by hand, such as this one, is that these ender crystals will have this base here, which is just visual, but it looks like bedrock. And there's also a chance that the ender crystals will have special properties such as this one, where it actually has a beam that points towards 0, 128, 0, and it also has the ability to be invulnerable, where you'll not be able to destroy the ender crystal. What makes it difficult to take the ender crystals that generate on top of the obsidian pillars during the end fight is that when you try to just move the ender crystal off of the bedrock block that they are on top of, the ender crystals will just explode. The reason that the ender crystal explodes when it is pushed is because when the ender crystal entity is being moved forward, it will actually catch itself on fire from its own fire block that it generates in the center of itself. This will cause the ender crystal to take damage and then explode. Although this behavior is not very common in normal gameplay, this is actually a known bug, and there will be a link in the description to the bug tracker if you want to look at this bug in more detail. Because the ender crystal explodes because of the fire, by removing the fire, you can actually allow the ender crystal to not explode. And the fire is only generated if there is a solid top block near the ender crystal that he can place it on. So such as glass, where there is not a solid top block, the ender crystal will not generate its fire, and therefore you can actually move the ender crystal safely. You can replicate the ender crystal getting damaged and exploding when it's getting moved through fire just by having fire being placed on a block beside it. And even though there's no fire underneath the ender crystal, if you move the ender crystal now, it will be pushed right beside this fire. This will cause the ender crystal to explode. The first method that can be used to steal the dragon's ender crystal is by moving the ender crystal when it has a special property where it cannot take any damage. This allows it to be moved through the flame block without being exploded. You can do this by resummoning the dragon, and during the process of the dragon resummoning, the obsidian pillars will regenerate. And when the obsidian pillars regenerate, the ender crystal above it will get this special property where it cannot be take damage. And just before the ender dragon actually summons in, the ender crystal will keep this property, and that during this time you can actually move the ender crystal off of the bedrock without the ender crystal taking any damage. But after the ender dragon has been summoned in, the ender crystals will return to being able to be damaged. This ender crystal has a lot of special properties that are quite useful to have, that I have talked about in a previous video, which I'll link down in the description. This next method is fairly simple. Just uses a really simple zero-tick device I came up with, where I have 2 pistons that are being butted by the redstone block. And when we update both these pistons at the same time, both pistons will extend. This piston will remove the power away from this piston so that he will zero-tick. This will allow the piston to extend his head inside of the entity hitbox of this ender crystal. Then he will retract it. This will cause him to warp the ender crystal past the piston. This is the mechanic that came in 1.9 where pistons can warp entities, and this allows the ender crystal to be moved without him actually taking damage from the fire block. This simple zero-tick device that I made here only works in some directions. I think it's the north and south direction that it works in. But I'm using Cubitic mod, and this allows me to slow down time so we can see what's happening. So we update these 2 pistons, you can see that they both move, and this will cause the pistons to zero-tick, which will pull the ender crystal off of the flame block, and this way the ender crystal does not take any damage from the flame block. Unlike the 2 previous methods where we remove the ender crystal from the bedrock, in this method we will remove the bedrock and then we can move the ender crystal later. So this is essentially a bedrock breaking method. I showed this with the dragon eggs where you can use it to break bedrock. So what we have here is we have a dragon egg above a melon block, and behind it is a piston. So then over here we have a machine which is a lazy chunk detector. So when I move away from this device, the device will keep activating and trying to send a redstone signal through here. But when the sand is falling down as an entity, it takes a while before it reaches the bottom, and therefore the signal never makes it through the sand. But when you go into lazy processing chunks, the sand will immediately fall down, allowing the signal to go through, and this will allow this piston to push and destroy this melon block, which will allow the dragon egg on top to fall through. I have a command block here that just says if the device gets activated, as well as an indicator light. So now if we move away from this device, it will eventually get put into a lazy processing chunk. And this will allow the piston to get activated, which will push the melon, which will drop the dragon egg, and since the dragon egg will be in a lazy processing chunk, the dragon egg will immediately fall down and replace the next block below it. So now you see the dragon egg fail, and we'll see if it replaced it. So the dragon egg has fell through, and it came down and it just replaced the bedrock piece here. So now we can easily move the ender crystal without it exploding, because now it doesn't place any flame blocks there. This last method is pretty simple as well. What we have here is the ender crystal with its flame block in the bedrock, and we have water streams coming down and it's putting out the flame block. Since over there we learned that the flame block is what causes the ender crystal to explode. So if we can just make the flame block disappear while we're pushing the ender crystal, then we can actually move the ender crystal safely. It can be difficult to precisely push the ender crystal at the exact moment that the water comes down and washes out the flame block. So if we allow the ender crystal to be in non-entity processing chunks, this will allow the ender crystal to no longer be processed, and therefore the ender crystal will no longer place a flame block there. This will allow the water to wash down, and then it will wash over top of this bedrock block, and we'll come over here and update this piston here, which is being budded, and the piston will push the ender crystal during this time. So now if we back up and allow the ender crystal to be placed in lazy processing chunks, the ender crystal will no longer be able to place its flame block down, which will allow itself to be updated, and you can see the water is moving now. So the water is actually coming over and it's spewing over the sides. So now if we come back, we can see that the ender crystal actually got moved. If you would like to look at these devices in more detail, there will be a world download in the description. So there you have it, guys, 4 different ways that you can use to steal the dragon's ender crystals. So if you found this interesting, show me with a like. If you'd like to see more quirky mechanics like this, subscribe, and don't forget to comment. Bye bye!